Strange Fauna, written and narrated by Z.A. Ralston, produced by Noisy Mayhem Publishing. 1. The exo-terrain vehicle shuddered, the tail end chucking a tooth-rattling wobble, throwing the four-wheel drive into a fishtail. Their rear drive chain cantered to the driver's side as both pairs of back wheels locked up, digging into the desert sand. The friction nudged the vehicle into a gentle 180-degree sliding stop in a small berm of its own making, facing back towards the way they had come. Wrenna, covering her pregnant belly protectively with both hands, felt a kick. Looking down, she smiled to see Scarrett had reached out the hand that wasn't gripping the steering wheel to shelter their children. A boy and a girl, as the scan by Dr. Tenfellow had revealed. They would be the first born in the colony, beating Dasher and Rankin by a trimester at the least, a fact they would wear on their sleeves with pride upon returning from this circuit, bragging rights. Like the old Earth saying went, there must be something special in the water, because a good 50% of the settlement's female inhabitants were currently at various stages of pregnancy. More than coincidence or chance. Something environmental was the current theory, considering they had only kissed dirt 13 months ago. They were all shocked by the success of their expeditionary force. No other mission had seen such yields. Most brig couplings suffering from cryolag, not entering a viable reproduction cycle for years. The previous record was a brig exultance team member who was still 36 months before conception. A 24-month cycle reduction. I have a few hours in the motor pool on these boxes. I think I can do the repair on site. Scarrett reassured the woman who had travelled the void in the centuries at his side, riding shotgun and co-pilot. He pushed the release and the door rose up, Scarrett quickly exiting, keeping the irritating dust and sands to the minimum for Wrenna. He immediately saw that the repairs were out of the question. The rear driver's side wheel had been sheared off at the hub by razor wire like thorny vines. I have good news and bad news, Scarrett announced, climbing back into the box. The bucket is junked, but only one of us is walking back to the settlement, he said, smiling before he saw concern written all over her face. What's up? No comms, just static, she said, biting her lower lip, her subconscious stress signal. That dust storm we drove through yesterday. We're in the eye. A wall of interference was between us and home. He swiped the holo display onto the screen. Zooming in, he pointed. See, the uplink to Mother is down and the swarm is dark, drowned by the high ore content, and we are low in these valleys and gullies, too low for the uplink with the last of our research node. It's basically a Faraday cage. He spoke, nod, lip bite. He closed the map. Let's grab a few of your favourites, I stashed. Green tea and peanut butter Nutri-Packs and snuggle up with a vid for the night, eh? He proposed, manoeuvring into the spacious rear compartment to make a comfortable nook. What temp do you want the habitat regulator set? Your sleep preset? He asked, trying to stay busy. She smiled and together they manoeuvred her into the rear sleeper. They talked baby names until Wrenna started to yawn and he filled her in on the plan. Oh, we'll head out in the morning and hopefully reach home by tomorrow night. The other box teams should be back by then. I'll print the parts and be back for you in the middle of the next day, he promised, to her snores. Attaching the Tudor belly cups carefully, he loaded orbital mechanics, apogee mode, 107. 2. He set out with the first rising sun and made suitable time cutting up the valley wall, stopping only to hydrate and try the portable comms. It was worth a shot, scanning the frequencies, hoping for a thinning in the wall of the dust cloud. The Voidfarer was turning in a slow semicircle, arm held high, when the ground decided to rip the footing out from under him. Thankfully, he recovered balance enough to not snap his tailbone, but unfortunately landed on his hip and shoulder, full body weight on both of the hydration sacks, exploding bladders in his gasping face, all over shirt and buttocks. Cursing his inattentive moment and his quickly drying soggy dacks, he strode on through the stifling morning heat. He started to see shadows flashing in his periphery and began to think he was feeling the effects of exposure starting to take hold. He told himself it was a stressed mind, hyperfocal and manufacturing race. He became so resolute not to flinch at mirages, he barely reacted when the insectoid-like creature, with an indeterminate number of appendages, skidded out onto the track he was navigating. It squawked, he squealed, they both froze. The abomination raising her head, scenting, spritzing musky pheromones, head featureless except for the vertical slash of a mouth, and 3 probing proboscis with eyeballs at the tips of 2 ends. Too blitzed to appreciate humanity's first contact, he was not at all welcoming nor diplomatic. He chased it off, sans protocol, with a few well-placed stone throws. The creature, backing up, making a chittering noise, grinding its outer proboscis together, before disappearing back into the undergrowth from which it had materialised. The second sun rose and he stopped for a quick consolidating rest in a glade. By the time he stood and stumbled towards the twins' noon zenith, he was convinced dehydration and fatigue meant, of course, he was seeing things. The one thing of which he was sure? How woefully unprepared he was, mentally, physically and logistically. His toes started to drag and he almost tripped over his own feet on multiple occasions, pushing on towards the camp. It became clear by mid-afternoon as he finally gained the high ground that he was not even halfway to his objective. And as the first sun set, he started looking for a place to bed down for the night, eventually deciding on a cleft in a rock face. The second sunset fell as he gathered kindling and fuel, defence against the frigid temperatures that would soon be upon him. The Nutripacks provided a full belly but inadequate hydration for the journey ahead, and he soon fell into a restless, listless sleep curled around the fire. Awake and away with the first dawn, his knees turned to jelly around the dawning of the second sun, and he repeatedly wavered, falling, drawing bloody hands and knees. Exhaustion leading him to think that he could not stop even for a moment's respite without losing the will to rise and walk again. The last time he fell for the morning, he was surprised to see Wrenna standing over him, casting joyous shade as he passed out. 3. He regained consciousness with Wrenna pouring water down his gullet in such quantity that he gagged, choking on the precious liquid. Reaching out, he cupped her cheek and said, "Darling, you need a shave," before reality came crashing down and he focused on the insectoid, regurgitating globules and hanging drops of water down its central proboscis for him to suckle into his dry mouth. He freaked out in bouts of alternating retches and screams before settling on shaking and hyperventilating. The creature backed up, tilting its head in a disconcerting human-like fashion, and they sat silent, each staring at the other. He lost the standoff when fatigue took him. Scarrett, eyes rolling back into his head, fainted, passing into the black for the second time that day. 4. He sat bolt upright, babbling, mouth seeking intelligible thought, hands slapping at the remnants of the terror his subconscious had fed him. After a few moments longer than he cared to admit, he regained composure to see the insectoid had dragged him to a sheltered grove, covering him with foliage and shrubbery. He noticed the creature watching him from across the small clearing, and he had the time to study the bulbous head, abdomen, and 3 thoraxes, the 4 bodily sections sprouting 4 legs from each. It appeared to be covered in a fine misting of hair that he knew from experience were coarser than they appeared. His saviour seemed an assortment of colours depending on how the light hit the carapace or the angle eyes perceived it. It scurried over to a large rock and started to forage around the base, producing large berry-like tubers in short order. Hesitantly, it crept over to drop the prize at his feet before backing up a few steps. When he made no attempt to pick the offering up, nudging the food towards him before it retreated again. He brushed the soil off and tentatively took a gritty bite of what turned out to be a sweet-tasting treat. Ravenous, he tore it open and devoured the fruit and the 2 other tuberous variations the insectoid dug up. Strength gaining, he repositioned between 2 boulders and lit a small fire. Bored, he threw a stick, half as a joke, but the insectoid retrieved it and dropped it back at his feet. For a time they played what he was sure would go down in history as the weirdest game of fetch in the known universes. After it decided the fun was over, the bug returned to the excavation and burrowed deeper. This time it came so close he could smell the musky tang it permeated. Sitting at his feet, it produced a few large drops of water that he first reluctantly sipped, then gulped thirstily. "Changing times, my new friend," he said, stoking the fire. "Changing times when you're bringing life onto a crazy rock such as this. Where is your family, little fella?" he asked, half expecting answer, but receiving no response. 5. They set out the next morning, with Scarrett using the opportunity to vent and unburden the insecurities and concerns he couldn't voice to Wrenna. By the time the crossing suns met in the noon sky, he was walking up the last rise to the settlement. He turned to thank his faithful companion and was surprised to see the hindquarters extending to reveal another 2 abdominal sections. The creature extended, rising to Scarrett's nearly 2 metres of height. Eye to eye, he stepped back when he heard the chest plate of the exoskeleton moistly cracking and crunching open with a sodden thwack, revealing scything claws. Realising his peril too late, Scarrett pivoted, turning to run, making it only half a step before the piercing pain of one of the newly exposed appendages ripped through his spine and tore out of his chest, the creature turning him, gnashing a huge salivating maw. It was then that he saw his folly and the hundreds of insectoids flowing from the undergrowth, out of every crack and crevice, flooding the valley they had just traversed. Displaying him as the prize that's cunning deceived and won, grinding back legs together, signalling clear the path down to the camp and plentiful feeding this one wrought for the hive. It was following me to a greater reward of meat, his last thought utter clarity as it tore him in 2, tossing 1 half to each of its favoured progeny, who had come up to sit either side and survey the camp in the hollow and their coming feast. 6. Wrenna started, sweating out the nightmare upon confused awaking. She had been dreaming of a giant caterpillar that was cradling Scarrett, breastfeeding him. It had sensed her presence and looked up, and then screamed a blood-curdling scream. It metamorphosed into a butterfly. Its mouth sprouted hideous row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. It chomped and twisted Scarrett's head off. She heard movement outside, glad to hear Scarrett returning after uncertain days and nights alone. She smiled and reached over to turn the headlights of the box on, lighting up a vista of horror insectile silhouettes. Wrenna heard someone screaming. Strange Fauna, written and narrated by Z.A. Ralston, produced by Noisy Mayhem Publishing.